Flow Editor Inspector. Let's take a look. I'm gonna select one of my content steps here and then open up the inspector with this button, which will also hide it. The inspector will go away automatically if you deselect the step by clicking somewhere else. So let's select it, open up the inspector, and let's go through these elements. First of all, it's the name of your step or block, same thing, that will be shown here on the screen. Here. Next block is the default next block where the story will continue. If this is empty, you see that there is no outgoing arrows from this block at all. So the story has no place to go from here. Now, when we add the default next block, where do we go from here when it's about to continue the story? You can see that it added this arrow. So now it's showing me that the story can continue that way. And sometimes you might even have multiple ways where it can go, but those are covered by other videos. Notes is just your own notes for the step, not visible for players or users, just for yourself. Here's a tab that allows you to switch between controls and smart objects. We're looking at controls first. Back button is the menu that allows you to disable or hide the back button. The difference is that disable still shows it, but you can tap it. Hide hides it all the way. Now, you want to always show the back button, because if you don't, it creates a point of no return. From that step, there is no going backwards because the button is not available. In tutorials, just always make it available. Just leave it to show. There are use cases in other types of contents where you might not want to show or need to show a back button. But for tutorials, just have it on always. Forward button, same thing, but obviously for going forwards. And if you show the forward button and players tap it, it goes to the default next block that's defined here. And you want to hide it if you're asking players for example, how many players do we have? And then players tap a button, which you set the amount of players into a variable, and then you continue the tutorial with the press of that button. So you don't need to and you don't want to show forward button in those cases. Then autoplay is just, do you want to continue the story automatically? If yes, then set it to true. And this is the case when players don't need to do anything. The tutorial just provided them information and it can automatically go on. Players don't need to do anything after that information. If the players do need to do something, now take a card from the deck, for example, then you want to set autoplay to false, give players time to do take their time to do that action, and then they will interact with the app when they are ready to continue. Then subtitle is what will be shown during the step, and voiceover is the voiceover file that will be played during the step. And save is required because none of this information that I'm adding here is saved until I click save. So if I just add text like that and I deselect the content step, you can see that that change was not saved. So remember to save these changes that you do here. Smart Objects tab. Let's take a look at this. This tab allows you to copy and paste objects and animations between different blocks. And here you can either, I have two objects here. The other one is just my content block camera. So where I have where's the view angle basically. And there's one meeple in this step. So I'm actually going to open up this step. Let's take a look. So I have this one meeple here, which does a jumping animation like that. So now here I can copy individual objects, or I can just select them both and copy all selected ones with this. And there is a button that allows you to quickly select all if you have plenty of objects in one step. And then you have the same things for just animation data. So it only copies the animation segments or pastes them. So let's start with the object copying. I'll do one example here. I'll select this step here, which has a pink cube, and I'll copy it. It goes to my clipboard. And now I select this step. I want to paste it here. I click this paste button. And now it's showing me the clipboard with the 10 most recent things that I have copied. Well, there's only one thing now. And the top copied a few seconds ago. The top one is always the most recent one. So I'll paste the cube pink to this block, and we can see that it appeared here into this block. Now let's next copy an animation to that block as well. So this 0 here means that that object does not have any animations, any animation segments in it. And on this meeple here, we do have number 4 here, which means it has 4 animation segments. And then if there are animation segments available, you can copy the animation data. So I'll just copy that data. And now you see that the paste animation buttons became available because I can now paste that data. So if we look at in the content step in itself, you can see I selected the meeple, and we can see 1, 2, 3, 4 animation segments, which is the meeple goes up and down, and then that short animation is just a bump in the end. So boom, there we go. So I copied those animation segments, and I'll now paste them to the cube. Also, again, it's showing me what I can paste here, and now it's only listing all the animations that I have copied, not the objects, because you can't paste an object as animation data. So now I have the same animation with the cube as well, and now if we go in and take a look, we will see that the location and animation data has been copied. Well, now they are on top of each other because they share the same location. But I can just grab the cube and move it aside. So now you can see that both of them have the same animation happening. And that is how you copy information using this panel. One important thing to mention here is that you can see the string underneath each object, and in each individual step you can only have one ID of each. You can have multiple pink cubes, for example, of course, but you can only have one of each with sharing this ID. And this ID is used to just sync information between blocks. For example, if we go back to this step, we can see that the ID for this here is the same than for this. What this means is that if I now go into this step, and let's say I just created a quick animation now, one segment animation for this. Now the cube does that. Now, if I now copy the object and I paste it into this step, it will replace the cube that I already have here because they share the same ID. So I will paste this, and now you just saw that the amount of animation segments went to 1 because it was replaced. If I didn't have this pink cube here, or if I didn't have a duplicate ID, it would have created a new object for me. So for example, if I go here, I add a new green meeple here, and I'm not even adding any animation to it. And now if I copy that green meeple and I paste it here, it will add it as a new element. And now we just got an additional meeple into this step. And let's go see, here it is. So that's why what's important to know about the IDs. If the key exists, it's going to replace it when you paste data. If it doesn't, it's going to create a new one. Then the inspector for logic blocks looks a bit different and a lot simpler because logic blocks don't really have, players don't see the logic blocks. So you only have the name for the logic block, the default next block, and then your own nodes. Remember to save once you're done. But this is everything that you need to change for logic steps or blocks. Again, same thing. So let's talk a little bit about the step names. My personal preference when I name steps is to name them so that it's easy for me to read my story. And I typically use a short ID that allows me to recognize these. For example, I use S for setup. So this is the first step of the setup. This is the second step for setup, S02. And then I just describe the step in just a very few amount of words just to see immediately, okay, open up Gamebox. I know what's happening on this step. Take components out. I know what happens on that step. So I don't need to actually go into the editor to see what's happening there. And also I use these when I then create the voiceover files. For example, for this step, I would name my voiceover file just s01.mp3. So it's kind of easy also to put them into the correct steps when you're at that stage of the content creation that you're adding them. Subtitles. Subtitle is the text that is shown to players during a step. So let's, for example, there is a subtitle in this step. So let me start here. It doesn't have any objects on the scene, but you can see the subtitle here. Nice 2 rows of text. And that usually happens when you have about 120 characters, which it's the ideal length. 2 lines of subtitle is fine, and usually that amount of information is pretty easy to animate as well. Now longer steps, for example, here I have 240 characters. The animation is more complex, and you can see that it's already a lot of text, and especially if people are using a small screen, for example, using a phone to use this tutorial, it's already getting to be difficult to read, even though there's voiceover reading it. But I recommend trying to limit the amount of characters to about 120. On my tutorials that I've built, my average on characters is between 100 and 120 characters on our step. So if I get to somewhere like close to 200, I tend to then try to break up that information into 2 separate steps if possible. Autoplay. So we already talked about autoplay before, so if it's true, the story will continue automatically. If it's false, the tutorial will wait there until players manually continue the tutorial. Now, you can see on this step here that it has a couple of symbols on it. The playhead here means autoplay has been set to true. So the story continues automatically once this step, the animation and the voiceover has been completed. The other symbol is indication that the voiceover file has been set, and if it has, you can play it here.
Do you want to open the door?
So those are the icons. If you don't have them, then there's no voiceover set, and the autoplay is set to false. Finally, a final note about the voiceover. When you are in the process of creating your voiceover files and adding them from this file manager to the steps, make sure they are formatted correctly. You will find the specific information on the Dized guide. Basically, it's MP3 files, bitrate about 128, 44,000 kilohertz sampling frequency, and mono channel is just fine for the voiceovers. And that is the Flow Editor Inspector.